They spent years messing with him, not suspecting that he was patiently building a personal prison for them. Mark stood ankle-deep in the dying autumn grass, his breath clouding in the sharp October air. Beside him, Nate was already crouching by the shed door, the heavy bolt cutters in his hands looking like a medieval weapon in the moonlight. The Delvin property was silent, a black void against the starry Nebraska sky, save for the single, dim bulb burning on the back porch of the main house. It was the same house they had egged, papered, and tormented since they were 12. "Look at this," Nate whispered, his voice tight with excitement. He tapped the metal shackle of the lock. It's a Master Lock Pro Series, hardened boron alloy. Old man Delvin dropped $100 to keep people out of a shed that's barely standing. Mark shifted his weight, the unease in his gut twisting like a cold snake. "Maybe that means we should leave it alone, Nate. This is not just a rusty latch anymore. This feels intentional. It means he's got something in there he does not want us to see," Nate countered, grinning. His teeth looked yellow in the gloom. "Come on, Mark. This is the finale. We plant the speaker, we rig the lights, and we watch him lose his mind one last time before I ship out for basic. Do not wimp out on me." Mark looked back at the house. The curtains did not move. Mr. Delvin was 74, a recluse who wore stained undershirts and shouted at the wind. For years, they had viewed him as a harmless NPC in their life's video game, an object to be poked to see if it would glitch. But looking at the new lock, sitting stark and shiny against the rotted wood of the shed door, Mark felt a shift in the dynamic. It did not fit. The wood was gray and splintering, covered in moss, yet the hardware was military grade. "Just cut it," Mark said, his voice dropping to a hush. He wanted this over with. He wanted to be back in his car, driving away from the heavy silence of this yard. Nate positioned the jaws of the cutters. He strained, the tendons in his neck popping, until a loud snap echoed through the yard like a gunshot. Mark flinched, scanning the windows of the main house. Nothing changed. No lights flickered on. No old man came storming out with a flashlight. "Open sesame," Nate whispered. He yanked the broken lock free and tossed it into the tall grass. He grabbed the handle. The door did not creak. It did not groan like old wood should. It swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a darkness that seemed thicker than the night outside. Nate clicked on his tactical flashlight, the beam cutting into the void. "What the hell?" Nate murmured. Mark stepped up behind him and peered over his shoulder. The beam did not illuminate piles of rusty rakes or bags of fertilizer. It revealed a hallway. Someone had built a structure inside the shed. Fresh drywall, unpainted and pale, formed a narrow corridor leading straight back. The floor was not dirt. It was poured concrete, smooth and gray. "He renovated?" Mark asked, confused. "He's hiding something," Nate said, stepping inside. "This is perfect. Imagine the acoustics in here for the scream box." "Nate, wait," Mark said, reaching for his brother's jacket. "This feels wrong. Smells clean. Too clean." Nate shrugged him off. "Stop being paranoid. That's a tool shed." He took 3 steps into the corridor. Mark hesitated on the threshold. The smell hitting him was not the metallic tang of tools or the earthy scent of mildew. It was the smell of bleach and ozone, a clinical, sterile scent that had no business being in a backyard in rural Nebraska. He looked at the door frame. It was reinforced with steel plating on the inside. "Nate, get out," Mark said, his voice rising. "We're leaving." "Relax. I just want to see where this—" Nate stepped on a section of the concrete that looked slightly darker. There was a pneumatic hiss, sharp and sudden. Before Mark could lunge forward, a heavy steel grate dropped from the ceiling behind Nate, slamming into the concrete with a bone-jarring clang. It separated the brothers instantly. Nate spun around, his eyes wide, dropping the flashlight. "What did you do?" Nate yelled, grabbing the bars. Mark grabbed the cold metal from his side. "It's a gate. It's automated." "Jesus, Nate, I told you. Lift it. Help me lift it." Nate grunted, heaving upward. Mark joined him, fingers scrabbling against the steel, pulling with everything he had. The grate did not budge a millimeter. It was bolted into a track in the wall. Then the second sound came. A low mechanical hum, coming from deep within the corridor behind Nate. "Mark," Nate whispered, backing away from the grate, looking into the darkness of the hallway. "Something's moving back there." Mark slammed his shoulder against the steel grate, screaming his brother's name, but the sound was swallowed by the sudden, oppressive insulation of the shed. The structure was not just renovated. It was fortified. The walls did not echo. "Nate, do not go deeper," Mark yelled, his hands shaking as he gripped the bars. "Stay by the gate." But Nate was not listening. He was backing away, mesmerized and terrified by the source of the hum. The flashlight, rolling on the floor, cast frantic, spinning shadows against the pristine drywall. Mark pressed his face between the bars, straining to see. The corridor was not empty anymore. A secondary door at the far end had slid open, and the hum was the sound of an industrial ventilation system kicking into overdrive. But it was not pulling air in. It was sucking it out. "It's getting heavy?" Nate gasped, clutching his chest. "The air, Mark, the air feels thin." "Break the wall," Mark commanded, pointing to the drywall. "It's just gypsum. Kick through it." Nate nodded, panic seizing his movements. He turned to the side and unleashed a vicious kick at the white paneling. His boot connected, but instead of crashing through, there was a dull thud. Nate cried out, hopping back and clutching his foot. "It's solid." Nate screamed, his voice already sounding distant, muffled. "It's concrete behind the drywall. It's all concrete." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. This was not a shed. It was a bunker, a trap. He looked around the small entryway where he stood, outside the grate but inside the main shed door. He needed a tool, a lever, anything. He ran back out to the yard, scanning the ground frantically. The bolt cutters. He grabbed them from the grass and sprinted back inside. "Move back," Mark roared. He jammed the jaws of the bolt cutters against the steel bar of the grate and squeezed. He squeezed until his muscles burned, until veins popped in his forehead. The metal of the cutters groaned, but the grate did not even scratch. It was hardened steel, too thick for the tool. "Mark!" Nate's voice was weaker now. He was slumped against the wall, sliding down. The hum of the ventilation was louder, a voracious vacuum. Mark dropped the cutters and grabbed the bars again. "Nate, look at me. Breathe slow. I am going to find the release. There has to be a switch." He turned away from his brother, frantically feeling the walls of the entryway. He ran his hands over the smooth steel of the doorframe, the ceiling, the floor. There were no buttons, no keypads, no levers. It was a seamless integration of trap and structure. "Why?" Nate wheezed. Mark looked back. Nate was on his knees, clawing at his throat. The pressure change was affecting his ears, his lungs. "Why does he have this?" Mark's eyes darted around the small vestibule he was standing in. To his left, half hidden by a draped tarp he had not noticed before, was a heavy workbench. He ripped the tarp away. He expected to see saws, drills, hammers, the tools of a man who built things. But the surface was empty of construction equipment. Instead, it was covered in monitors. 4 black screens, currently dormant, and a series of ledgers. And a red light. A small, blinking LED on a control panel embedded in the desk. "Nate, hold on," Mark yelled. He hammered his fist on the control panel, hitting random buttons. Nothing happened. The screens remained black. The grate did not lift. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a metal stool, and smashed it against the control panel. Plastic shattered, sparks flew, but the hum inside Nate's chamber did not stop. If anything, it pitched higher. Nate was curled in a fetal position now. His movements were sluggish. He was suffocating. Not just from lack of oxygen, but from the pressure drop. Mark fell to his knees by the grate, helpless tears streaming down his face. "Nate, fight it!" But he could not fight physics. Mark watched, separated by 2 inches of steel, as his little brother's eyes rolled back. The bravado, the strength, the years of tormenting the neighborhood. It all vanished, leaving just a terrified boy dying in a concrete box. "Please," Mark whispered to the empty air. "Please, stop." He looked back at the workbench. He needed to understand. He needed to know how to stop it. He grabbed the ledger lying open next to the control panel. He expected to see wiring diagrams or receipts. He looked at the page, and his heart stopped beating. The handwriting in the ledger was meticulous, almost architectural. It was jagged but precise, inked in blue ballpoint. Entry 412, October 14th, 2019. Subject A, Mark, and Subject B, Nate. Attempted perimeter breach via north fence. Subject B displays impulsive tendencies. Climbed the rotted post. Subject A is cautious, hesitated for 12 seconds. Note: reinforce north fence only partially to encourage Subject B's confidence. Mark stared at the words, his vision blurring. He flipped back a page. Entry 389. Halloween, 2018. Subjects deployed aerosol irritant, stink bomb, through basement window. Ventilation test successful. The draft carried the particulate exactly as modeled. The isolation chamber will require higher RPM fans to counteract their lung capacity. Estimated time to unconsciousness for Subject B, 4 minutes. Mark dropped the book. It hit the concrete with a flat slap. He was not reading a diary. He was reading a lab report. Delvin had not been hiding in his house out of fear. He had not been calling the police because he did not want the police to stop them. He wanted them to keep coming. He had been grooming them. Every prank they pulled, every time they got away with it, Delvin had allowed it. He was studying their behavior, testing his defenses, measuring their aggression and their stupidity. Mark looked at the wall above the desk. He had not noticed it in the dark, but now, with the light from Nate's dropped flashlight spilling through the grate, he saw the corkboard. It was covered in photos. There was a photo of Nate at age 14, throwing toilet paper. A photo of Mark at 16, keying Delvin's mailbox. But there were others. Photos taken from inside their own house. A grainy shot of Nate sleeping in his bedroom, taken with a telephoto lens through the window. A picture of Mark sitting at the dinner table. And in the center of the board, a large blueprint titled, "The Aviary." It was a diagram of the shed, the corridor, the pressure plate, the vacuum chamber, and next to the chamber 2 silhouette figures drawn to scale. They matched Mark and Nate's heights exactly. "He built it for us?" Mark whispered, horror drenching him like ice water. "He did not just build a trap. He built our trap." He looked back at the grate. Nate was not moving. The hum was deafening now. Mark frantically scrambled back to the blueprints. His eyes tore across the white lines, looking for a weakness, a shutdown code, anything. His finger traced the wiring diagram. Emergency release/body retrieval protocol. It was not a button on the console. It was a manual override, located near the entrance, hidden behind a false panel in the wainscoting. It was designed so the operator could retrieve the specimens after the process was complete. Mark spun around, locating the panel near the door he had entered through. He jammed his fingers into the seam of the wood, ripping his nails back, ignoring the pain. He pried the wood loose. Behind it was a red iron lever. Mark grabbed it. It was rusted or maybe painted to look that way. He planted his feet and pulled. It would not budge. It required immense force. "Come on!" he screamed, putting his entire body weight into it. He thought of Nate's stillness. He thought of the years of laughter, the cruelty they had dished out, thinking they were the kings of the street. They were just rats running through a maze that had been under construction for a decade. With a grinding screech of metal on metal, the lever gave way. The sound of the vacuum cut out instantly. It was replaced by the hiss of air rushing back into the vacuum, a violent equalization of pressure. The steel grate in front of Mark retracted into the ceiling with a shudder. "Nate!" Mark scrambled into the corridor, dropping to his knees beside his brother. Nate was pale, his lips tinged blue. Mark grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him violently. "Breathe! Nate! Breathe!" For a terrifying second, there was nothing. Then, Nate's body convulsed. He drew in a ragged, desperate gasp that sounded like tearing fabric. He coughed, retched, and rolled onto his side, sucking in the air greedily. "Get up!" Mark hissed, pulling Nate's arm over his shoulder. "We have to go. Now." Nate could not walk. His legs were jelly. Mark practically dragged him, their boots scraping loudly on the concrete. They stumbled out of the corridor, past the workbench with its damning evidence, past the open ledger, and out into the cool night air. They collapsed in the tall grass about 20 yards from the shed, gasping, their lungs burning. Mark checked Nate's pulse. It was racing, erratic but strong. He was alive. Mark lay on his back, staring up at the stars. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, crushing clarity. He wanted to call the police. He wanted to burn the shed down. He wanted to scream, but as he turned his head toward the house, the words died in his throat. The light on the back porch had been turned off. The house was dark, except for one window on the second floor. The curtains were drawn back. Standing there, illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lamp from the road, was Mr. Delvin. He was not holding a phone. He was not holding a weapon. He was wearing his pajamas, holding a mug of tea. He was looking right at them. Mark froze. He locked eyes with the old man across the yard. Delvin did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked patient. He took